Morgathia was a witch, who once peeped in the worlds of shadows known as the Eldoria. It was a name people whispered, as they only recognized her navy blue domineering and feared over the kings and paupers. A full night, black as ink, surrounded her tower, which was at the outskirts of Blackroot Forest, coiled with vines, covered with fog, and no man ever stepped foot into that realm. Born hundreds of thousands of years ago, Morgathia was sustained by a number of spells from previous existences. However, as might be expected, time was gradually attacking her soul. She sensed it in the trembling of her hands and the stutters and magical spells she was uttering. She who used to rule her man besides turning the wind into sweet pea, was now a candle fighting the wind. In the darkness of her fixed stone chamber, Morgathia sat surrounded by the smell of burning sage and silent dust. High bookshelves that rose from floor to the ceiling were filled with large volumes which seemed to murmur things that she alone could hear. A rectangular vessel made of black stone with a reddish, lucid fluid lay in the middle of the room. "This will be my last performance," she whispered, putting down the last penny on the table. This was a spell she had been working for several years, not for control or malice, but for forgiveness, a concept that had no place in her life, but tormented her in her sleep. Swirling in her mind, Morgathia realized that with that spell she could either alter the course of the land of Eldoria, or lose herself in the process. Forest angrily sensed that out there something was changing. "I heard wolves howling in the night and voices of other things I could not really see." People in Blackthorn knew of lights glowing at the top of the tower, blue and purple, like stars of the night. The villagers subdued were friends of my family, however among them was a daring girl called Elara, much younger than I. Morgathia had always been her favorite, and she herself always pictured her as a soul who had become a witch due to her own misfortune. That night, when all the village folk slept with their hearts pounding, Elara pulled her father's cloak over her head and walked off in the direction she knew not. Maybe Morgathia would have the skills to make one and use it against the other. She started casting a spell, and the sound of her voice cut as sharp as a silver sword. "The stuff that life is made of and death itself, redeem the soul of me." The cauldron bubbled furiously and generated a low frequency that actually vibrated the bone of her body. Her heartbeat galloped as if waiting to pop out from her chest. The temperature climbed, the lights went out, and in the middle of the gloom, a voice boomed out through a large cauldron at one side of the room. He felt it to be smooth and rubbery, a voice she hadn't used in the last 300 years. "Morgathia, why do you have a dream of walking such a road?" Her eyes widened. "Elara." She murmured how he was the last family member she once had, who died at the beginning of her desperate struggle for the crown. His death had been the reason for her anger, the cause she engaged in the forbidden magic. "You cannot wipe out the past with magic," the man with the shaky southern drawl said, and I remembered his name was Alaric. "Despite this, she or he can change the future." She could cry now, crying this ugly tear that stung her face. "I know. But if I fail now, she will devour this world when I am gone." Out there, Elara came to the base of the tower, and she was thumping in her chest. The ground shook, and there was a flash of blue light coming from the top of the structure, and the bushes exploded with energy floating through the tress of the forest. With great effort, she opened the heavy wooden door before her and started up the spiral staircase. And when Elara arrived to the chamber, she saw Morgathia standing over the cauldron, her hands with blue flames, her eyes closed as if struggling against something. "Stop." Morgathia blinked, taken aback that this fragile human girl was crying Overlord's gems, she said softly. Her eyes opened wide, and what used to be emerald green was now filled with fire. "Why are you here, child?" She drove the words deep into my heart, her voice rough but tender. Finally, Elara came forward, and though visibly trembling, she stood firm. "Because you don't need to face it by yourself." Morgathia's hands shook and the flame faded. This fearless child filled what had been a cold house for her, and she had never felt it since years. For a moment she saw her life in the reflection of the mortal boy with the southern accent and sudden grin, the smell of the house they grew up in, and the emptiness that came after. "Perhaps is there another way?" Morgathia said, crying, saying this softly. The lights of the cauldron turned blue one final time and it turned off. The fog that was still believed to surround and envelope them got cleared and the sky was no longer dark but starry instead. The trees closed their eyes again, and the ugly gaping sounds of nightlife creatures replaced the eerie silence of the day. Morgathia down on her knees against Elara's feet. The fire in her irises disappeared. It was substituted by gentleness. "You have made me realize what I lost, you dear child. Who am I to say I owe you more than I can give?" His eyes met Elara's, and she smiled. A hopeful thing to do. They want to give Eldoria a second chance so that she can start from scratch. And thus the witch of Blackroot Forest opted to speak before she dies and imparting knowledge that led her to that ordeal. To Eldoria she was not a villain, but the protectors who was able to find her way to redemption through a child's courage. Therefore, Morgathia's ultimate spell was not of magic or domination, sanctuary and continuity of the tale of the Raki village, where the forest murmur was not the fear but the hope. Please like and subscribe my channel.